So one question I have, because the sweet Westerns you specifically say aren't too steamy, and then
Not at all.
they're not at all steamy, and then your historicals are steamy. And I know like there are reader expectations associated with that, but I'm curious, like when you're just wearing your writer hat, has writing some books where you're not allowed to explore steam and some books where you are allowed to explore steam given you any insight or perspective on when you want to add steam and when you don't?
That is a really good question. I will say that the sweet westerns were the first books that I've written. I've got about 40 sweet westerns. They don't actually qualify as sweet because there is violence and drinking and cursing, and it's the cowboy books that are the cowboy movies that we grew up watching where they punch each other and whatnot, but there's no steam in them at all. And then I have again another about 40 contemporary cowboys that were written very similar. Some of them have incredibly short sex scenes after marriage in the epilogue, but they're basically steam free. And again, same time period. I made the decision in 2018, 2019 to move out of that genre. And I sat down and I thought, what is it that you like about historical Westerns? What do you like about cowboys? I actually have this whole theory, my TED talk here. I believe that we have two very different genres here. Westerns, a Western will end happily ever after if the characters are committed to one another and are agreeing to work hard together to make a life
Mm-hmm.
together into the future. They could be dirt poor, they could still be on the Oregon Trail, but they're going to be together, and that's going to be their happily ever after. Our Regencies and our Victorians are happily ever after if the two characters are committed to one another and have a manner, have a way to support themselves in the
Mm.
manner in which they've been accustomed. It's we rarely have a happily ever after where she's going to have to be wearing a peasant dress and working her fingers to the bone for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
There's usually some sort of inheritance issue that's often the plot, right?
Yeah.
You know, because that's part of the appeal, part of the universal fantasy of being able to wear these beautiful silk gowns and have servants for the rest of our lives. But that's what we
Mm-hmm.
readers
Yeah.
want. So two very different happily ever afters. And in 2018 and 2019, I sat down and what do I like about these books? I like the grit. I like the violence. I like the adventure plots. And that happily ever after appealed to me at the time. I have since I can go back and forth now. And I decided that the Scottish books and the medieval books that I grew up reading, like in the fourth grade, were this way. So I said, I'm going to switch over. It was a concerted, very deliberate. I signed with Dragon Blade Publishing and I published some books with them in order to reach a new audience. My old audience was very upset with the idea of me adding spice and steam into
Mm-hmm.
my books, but I was able to, make the transition, I suppose. And then I grew from there with medieval Scottish books. Then I changed into medieval comedies right around the time the pandemic hit, which was fabulous because we all needed laughs and these were
Yeah.
ridiculous laughs. And then I switched over to writing Scottish Victorian comedies, um, which, are happily ever after when they've got the money at the end, basically. And it works because that's what we love. I went back and I rebranded my Westerns under a different name. So now it's Caroline Lee writing as Josephine West because I was having a lot of my current audience is much larger than the sweet Westerns were. And I was having issues with people who read my books going back and finding the sweet Westerns and then getting the entire book and finding out there was no sex and being upset about it, which is totally understandable. So I rebranded them just so if they're written by Josephine West on the cover, there's no spice. And I
Yeah.
have that on the website. So I can't remember the last time I wrote a story that didn't have any spice to it. It was probably 4 years ago. So I would say that I'm finally getting around to answering your question. I I am not actively writing books that are both steamy and not steamy. If
Mhm.
that
How did it feel to start writing books that had sex scenes?
honestly, it was intimidating. It sometimes still is, to go from this not at all sex to, and my first several steamy books, you can tell there might be like one scene and then one scene in the epilogue, that sort of thing. And now I'm getting to the point where I'm like, well, chapter 2, let's get going. But it, you know, it can be to think, oh God, gosh, they have to have sex again. How are we going to make this one? What are the logistics of this scene going to be?
Yeah.
So it's not boring, the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah. No, I relate to that because it is a little bit like, well, the reason we enjoy reading sex scenes is because it is another instance of the characters being vulnerable and connecting with each other. But then there's the pressure of, but how do I do this in a new, interesting way that is true to the characters and not just being like, let's explore a new kink because we haven't done that before. But at the same time, being open-minded and saying maybe we need to explore different kinks.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah. You're like, well, we could do this on the bed again, or I don't know, a secluded mountain glen. Put it in a carriage somehow. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.